Hello. So today I thought we could focus more on some system functions, that being random and map, and they're quite important in this whole field of creative programming, because obviously when you want to create code or create art, you want it to be dynamic. You don't want it to be static or staying still. So those two system functions are actually quite important. So those two functions do exist outside of p5JS, but we're going to be focusing on their implementation inside p5JS. So let's get started. So the first one I'm going to focus on is random. So there's a function called random in p5JS, which is basically it assigns a random value between two values. So let's say, for example, we say let ran equals random, and we specify a minimum and a maximum. So that will be, let's say, 0 and 10. And let's actually look what that value looks like. So we'll say console.log rand. Now if you look here, you'll see that this causes an error. Now this is one of the quirks with p5JS, that you can't write the random function here for some reason. It only allows you to implement it within the setup function within the draw function, because this is a p5JS variation of random. So if you put it outside of these two functions, it throws an error. So we're going to specify it here. We'll say rand equals that, and then if we look at it, you'll see that it gives a value between those two values, but it's a decimal value. So it's 8, but a certain number of decimal places after. That's because what we've been working with so far is something called ints, so integers. So this 0 is an integer, 10 is an integer, that's an integer, that's an integer. They're basically numbers that are whole numbers, no decimal place after the point. Floating numbers are numbers that have decimal places after it. There's a whole variation of math and computer science called floating points and working out how to deal with those sort of problems. We're not going to focus on that right now, but just bear in mind that random produces a float value. So why is this useful? So what we can say is circle, and we can specify, let's say this is rand x, let's control C that, control V, change that to y. We can specify the coordinates for our shape to be defined randomly. So we can say rand x, rand y, and we need to give a size, so let's say 10. And you can see the circles there. Let's make that a bit bigger. Let's say 10 to 100, and you can see a bit more there out in the open. And let's make that a bit bigger as well. So 100. So yeah. So each time we run this, you can see the circle moves across the screen because its position is defined randomly. Now you can kind of go a bit further than that and make this a bit more interesting. There's a parameter called window height and window width, which dynamically makes this canvas size as big as it possibly can be in the space provided. So let's try using that. So we'll say window height, and we'll say, where is it, x and y? It's x, so it will be window width, window height, because your 0 value to the width and then your 0 value to the height. So you want to specify that range there. So yeah, you can basically randomize it anywhere. But let's make this a bit more interesting, right? So let's say we put this, let's firstly make this black so it's a bit more easy to see. And then now we can specify this rand x and rand y here. And now what should happen is you've got this sort of dotting across the screen. It's pretty cool, right? Now, as you can see here, let's stop it for a minute. It keeps flashing. So that's because we're rendering a new background every time. So if we get that and then put that here, and then get rid of these two, what should happen is the screen should fill up with dots. Pretty cool, right? So we can also use that with color. So let's talk about how we would put color into this example. So we can specify here. So let's say R, G, and B, and then we can say random, and then this can be between 0 and 255, and since that thing's pretty much the same, we can just copy it down. So let's do Control C, Control V, Control V, and then we can just say fill, and then we'll have R, G, B, and then run it. And now we've got a whole array of colourful circles. Pretty cool. Okay, so that kind of covers, it's actually quite distracting. Alright, so I'll save the previous sketch and I'm going to work on a new sketch here. I will try talking about the map function. So what the map function does is it maps a range of values to another set of range of values. So the way it works is you have a function here, so called map, and this is your variable, let's call that v. You then have your min range, so min, then you have your max range here, and then you have the comparative value that you're using. So I believe that's min, and then your max here. So you have 5 values you're mapping to. So this is your range 2, so your, let's say the second range, and then this here is your first range of values. That corresponds to your variable v. It looks a bit messy, but it will make sense when we get started into it. So let's say, for example, you wanted to map the mouse position across the screen against the color gradient. Okay, so let's make that black. Let's make, yeah, so we'll say map. We want to map the mouse's x coordinate. So as the mouse moves across the screen, the background color changes. So let's do something like that. So we'll say here, so we've got a background number, and then the background number will be stored here. So let's say, let's equate that to 0 so far. So we'll say background number, yeah, and then we'll map that, and we'll say our smallest value would be, for the first range will be 0, then the maximum would be 400 in this case because of the thing we've got there. We know that the width of the canvas is 400. And the range we're mapping it to is 0 to 255. So we'll have a number here that we can use called background. And then, yeah, so we'll have, this will generate a number for us, this function here, and then we can save that to the background as a variable. So that'll be C, Control V, make that equal to that. And now what you should see is as the mouse moves across the screen, it goes from black to white, because remember, when you generate an RGB value, it and you specify a color with only one number, that sets the that does grayscaling. So let's try making that a bit more interesting. Let's try doing that as RGB values. So R, background R, Control C that. So let's do R, G, B, and we can change the background to R, G, B, red, green, blue, yeah. So we got that specified, and then we can say this specifies our redness. So by going X and Y across the screen, that specifies our redness. We can then say by going up and down the screen, so let's say by Y, and then we can reverse that, so we can say 255 by 0. By going up and down the screen, that specifies our greenness. So we'll have very interesting colours. So as we move left and right, you can see it kind of makes a weird sort of greeny colour to red. As you move that way, that way, that way, And then we can also say something on the lines, let's try figuring out something with the blue. We can say our blue, we can say mouse Y plus mouse X, and let's put that in brackets so we can group that as a variable, and we can map that between 0 and 800, and map that between 0 and 255. And so as we move across the screen, we get weird, strange colors. So the last one we're doing is we're getting the mouse's Y coordinate and the mouse's X coordinate, added them together, and we specified our limit range of being 0 and 800, because obviously when you go here is the maximum, and we map that to our color value of 0 to 255. So we can have interesting values that way too. So as you move the mouse across the screen, it will come up with different values. And we can also print that. So let's do console log so we can actually look at what this looks like. We'll say back so 0. That's a bit hard to look at. So yeah, as we go here, 5, and then as we go up here, so you can see you get strange and interesting values. That's all I'll say. So we've covered two functions today: random, which is used to generate a random value that's a floating point. We also used map, which also generates a value for us, mapping a single range to another range based on a variable. And they both give decimal values, so as you can see here, they're all floating points. They're not single integer values. So yeah, I think that covers it for now. I'll save both of these functions, and I'll paste the code or the link to the project in the description below. If you have any questions, let me know, and yeah, have a play around with it. Let me know what you do with it. But besides that, see you next time. Bye bye.